we can get into the conversation. We are discussing all about love up to chapter 5, which is page 83 for those who have the text. I want to offer a suggestion that we pick up from chapter 2. Last week, we really didn't delve into the second chapter too much around the conversation with children, specific. And for this week's reading, it picks up on that same theme. Now, we could start in many different ways, as always. Whatever compels you to share, please do share. If you don't feel like sharing, it's totally cool. Like Ron said, you can be chilling the whole time, just listening, that's totally fine. You can also chat in any questions or comments that you may have. I also want to name that part of how we learn is with one another through this process is by having critiques, by having questions, by having praise for one another. So please feel free to show each other love, show each other support when you're speaking. Affirmations of whatever sort is definitely welcomed. Oh yeah, if you're outside of NYC, let us know where you are. I saw somebody's here from Atlanta. Yay. Shout out
is
to
like
ATL. Ron be having jokes all the time. Austin, Texas, San Jose, California.
Welcome.
Wow.
Welcome.
Oh my God, that's so dope. See? Welcome to all of you. So yeah, I want to start off with that. I'll give this a more specific question. So chapter 2 is Justice, Childhood Love Lessons. And on page 17, she names, we learn about love in childhood. Whether our homes are happy or troubled, our families functional or dysfunctional, it's the original school of love. I cannot remember ever wanting to ask my parents to define love. To my child's mind, love was the good feeling you got when families treated you like you mattered and you treated them like they mattered. Love was always about good feeling. That's how she opens up chapter 2. And in chapter 3, she brings it to honesty. And I thought that was interesting, in terms of choosing to place a chapter on honesty and lies right after a chapter about children and how children learn love. It's often said that children tell the truth in many ways. It's hard for children to kind of mask, different ways of, lying, basically, is her theory in chapter 3. So I want to offer that up as a point of conversation. What are you guys' thoughts around her theory around children and how children learn how to love and how we learn how to love as children?
I wanted to this is great. That's a great question. I just wanted to add to that thought, maybe also the idea of, because in chapter 3, they start to talk about all of these different inherent structures that we have to navigate love. So if lying is a part of patriarchy and patriarchy is a way that we have to navigate love, I also wonder, how does that change? To Hooks's point, I said Bell like I knew her. To Hooks's point, how does that change how we love one another? You know what I mean? Because that tripped me out, because they started talking about children lying, and then she started going into how lying is a form of navigating patriarchy. So it's more than love. It's like everything, So that, I just want to add that.
Definitely, great question, great comment.
I wanted to maybe offer the point about shame. And how children don't understand shame until somebody teaches them that something should be hidden or not, is not appropriate, or it's appropriate in the home, but it's only something that you talk about at home. You don't talk about it in the streets. even though that might be the place that it needs to be talked about so that they understand that the things that are happening to them at home are not normal, or shouldn't be happening at all.
I think that ties into also the secrecy, especially in communities of color, about, you know, what happens in this house, you don't discuss it, and it allows other behaviors to go on, so that lying is also, as Hooks mentions, can involve secrecy. It's withholding of information. And it's, as a child, it's like you see something at home, but the underlying message is that, you know, it stays within these walls.
And I also like how she brings in, like, really early in the chapter, this idea of lovelessness not being something about material lack. And I think a lot of times, especially now when people are talking about health disparities, they are making it seem like love and care for your family and your children is something that is dependent on how much you make, when really it's about setting boundaries and having a respectful relationship with children. And like, she goes into talking about how physical punishment is not necessarily the way that we need to go, and we can set boundaries and teach responsibility in more creative and engaging ways that stimulate the mind. And I think that that is something that transcends class and income. It's something that all income levels could learn.
I was wondering, I know I put a question in the chat just about hitting children and, you know, what people think about that. And it just stood out to me. I think it was like on page 21. She said, a young professional, the mother of a small boy, brags about the fact that she did not hit. When her son misbehaved, she clamped down on his flesh, pinching him until he got the message. But this too is a form of I don't know if I'm pronouncing abuse. The other guests supported this mother and her husband in their methods. I was astounded. I was a lone voice speaking out for the rights of children. So I don't know. I just wondered what people thought about hitting, or, you know, hitting children.
I love the way Hooks talks about hitting children, because she framed it later about, like, if someone said that about their wife, or like said that about their wife, people would be up in arms. And I don't think enough people think about that difference in, like, how we think rearing a child or having that kind of physical relationship with a child is different than how we relate with other humans. And in her book, Sisters of the Yam, which I think she references here, but I just read back to back, she talks about how linking physical punishment, particularly in the Black community, back to enslavement, and how Black people, as a Black people of formerly enslaved, like, we learned to beat our children so that they wouldn't be beat to death. And we have to do this process of unlearning. But I personally do not agree with hitting children, because we are big adult people, and our strength and the kind of trust it kind of betrays. But I don't have children, so I know that it's a difficult thing.
Hi. There's also, I'm not sure if I don't think she mentions it on the book, but oftentimes, for example, like my parents or people that I know, when it comes to hitting children, they talk about the Bible. I don't know specifically, like, word for word what the Bible says in regards to hitting children, but
spare the rod, spoil the child, something like that. Yeah.
Yes. So even in religion, it comes up in regards of hitting children, where it's okay, you know, to some people's belief. So I guess when she was talking to the couple in regards of that, maybe that it's been normalized, I guess, because religion and also the way that we were raised. And so when she brought it up, it's like a ha ha ha, yeah, that's kind of funny. But she's right, you know, if you were to say that you hit your wife, or if the wife hits the husband, then, you know, that's a different conversation. It has a different tone. So it was very interesting when she compared those two scenarios.
Yeah, about that scripture, spare the rod, spoil Am I muted? Yeah, sorry. I thought I was muted for a second. About that scripture, spare the rod, spoil the child. Someone said something to me.
You're muted.
You're
Yeah.
muted. Ah, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yeah.
Sorry. So yeah, about that scripture, spare the rod, spoil the child. In Psalms 23, it also says, thy rod and staff, they comfort me. So if a rod and staff comforts you, is it really something that's being used to beat a child into submission, or is it something that we've always, or is it the way that we've always interpreted the scripture? You know, and so that kind of like completely changed my perspective. But as for me, I definitely don't agree with hitting children. I grew up in a Caribbean family. I'm Haitian, so I mean, I was beat, and honestly, it's all I've ever seen in terms of how children were reared and raised in my family. So I know it's gonna be like a new thing, definitely a challenge for me when I do have children. But you know, I don't want to introduce that kind of discipline just because, you know, I don't ever want to raise my children in an environment where they equate abuse with love, where, oh, I'm hitting you because I love you. Like, that's not ever a loving way. And I know it, again, is going to be a challenge because it's all I've ever known and seen, but I definitely want to figure out ways to, just be more loving in terms of how I discipline my children.
I wanted to.
Sorry. Go ahead.
Okay, thank you. I wanted to touch on the transition that I saw from chapter 2 to chapter 3, and basically the question that I think has been posed and what came to me is like, what does home and society teach children about love? And I think like that was the connection, or like the transition between those two. Is like, even whether it's like you're being, for me, it was go outside and get the switches, you know, like that's, my grandmother did that. So that's what I remember, especially like being raised in the South, that's a thing. But even to like something, my father getting on my brother or chastising him or like silencing him, it's almost like, you know, once you get into society where like this honesty is almost like a lost language in mainstream society, like your inner child has already like lost its voice. So even by, I think later on in chapter 3, she talks about like, even when you're saying nothing, you know, that's still making a statement. Like people think, oh, I'm not lying because I'm not saying anything at all. But it's like, you're not expressing yourself or you're withholding the truth. So that's still an act. But yeah, I don't want to get too deep into chapter 3, but that's the transition that I saw there.
Oh yeah, that's, you can keep going. Mm-hmm.
I really appreciated how she allowed for there to be some level of nuance in our relationships with our parents, in the sense that just because your household was not loving doesn't mean that it was void of care and affection. And I think this is especially important for me and for those of us who grew up lacking resources, whether that be monetarily or emotionally and so on and so forth. And we want to think of our parents as human beings and understand that in spite of all of that lack, they were able to nurture us. It's a miracle that I'm alive, considering the circumstances of the way that my mother was put in order to raise me and to feed me and to keep me in one piece. But at the same time, you have to acknowledge the dysfunction that was inherent in that survival mode in order to heal from it and move on and to break those patterns and cycles. So I appreciated the nuance.
I also wanted to bring up the fact that in the end of chapter 2, because Stephanie, you brought up chapter 2 in terms of like not really digging as deeply into that. And the part on page 25 where she talks about love was not a choice. The love I learned about was bound by duty and obligation. And she's citing another author at that point. My family taught me our culture's rules and beliefs about love even with the best intentions, our parents often confuse love with what we would now call abuse. So just moving a little bit further back, it's like that goes back into chapter 3 about lying, because if you see your family as someone you are obligated to love, to say the opposite of that when you actually feel it is to you know, like it's almost like blasphemy, right? Like, oh, I can't like not love my mom. You know what I mean? It's my mom. And like people sometimes don't have any better response other than that's it. Like, that's your mom. You only get one. So you must love her, even if she like completely ruined the whole soul. You know what I mean? And so I don't think that that's healthy, because it immediately puts you in a position to try to rationalize other people's shit, which causes you to be in like therapy and shit like that, because you're too busy trying to feel this thing you don't feel. And I think that's a hard part that our kids need to learn very early on. You don't like your uncle because he's your uncle. You like your uncle because he's doing the things that are listed above. But if he's done something to you, or have hurt you or harmed you, you have to be very honest about, this is hurtful for me, whether it's something that was said, whether it was something inappropriate that was done physically, emotionally. But this idea that like blood is thicker than water, my student used to always say, but like water washes away blood. So at the end of the day, like it's not as thick as you may think. And we're not obligated to lie our ways into loving our families or the people that we've been reared under, just because of that. So I think that was really helpful for me in terms of just processing this idea of like obligatory love. Like, I don't need to do that.
It also makes me, makes me just kind of think about the complexities of love. I mean, to Shemeka's point as well, and I can't find it now. I was looking for it. There was this point, it might have been in chapter 3, where she was speaking to like an inmate who was kind of exploring, inmates who were exploring some of that abuse and of their past and trying to acknowledge it. But even recognizing that abuse of his past didn't negate his feelings of wanting to be present for his mom before she passed away, right? So there was still, even though he was exploring those concepts and he understood the harm that was done, he still had a desire to be connected to his mother. And so it kind of, it speaks to me about just the complexities of it, that it's not, even with this definition that she outlines, that she lays out in the beginning of the book, and she refers back to it consistently, constantly, it still just makes me think about how complex the concept of love and the emotions and feelings that are connected
about a conversation that I had years ago with someone that said, like, if we're lying to each other, or if someone's lying, then you don't even give the person an opportunity to respond appropriately, right? Because it's kind of like they're responding to half truths. And a lot of times people will say, I like how she was talking about, like, you know, people lie because they don't want to hurt people's feelings. And I just always found it fascinating that people don't want to hurt people's feelings with the lie, but then they'll participate in the action, right? You think about someone who's cheated on a partner. Exactly. I didn't want to tell them the truth because it would hurt their feelings. But you cheated. It's like, wait a minute, let's reevaluate what has a higher consequence, because guess what? If you don't cheat, then you don't have to lie about it. And it just doesn't really give anybody it doesn't really give anybody the opportunity to be your fullest self and have people involved in front of you. You know, we talk a lot about wanting to create these spaces around evolution, and I want to see if the has changed. Well, people are still lying. How can you assess the change? So that's what that the whole line.
Yeah.
But one of the things that struck me and what Bell Hooks was talking about was how we make children complicit in our lives, and as adults we call them little white lies, but it kind of starts children down that path of thinking that to get what you want or to finesse, you know, a certain situation, you have to lie. that's the beginning of it. I feel like we all do, you know, either our parents did it to us or we do it to children. You know, don't tell your father we stopped at the ice cream shop. You know, don't tell your mom we had, you know, 3 donuts instead of 1. And those sound really innocent, but it kind of it plants in a young person's mind what you need to do in order to sort of like get what you want.
I feel like it goes back to like the secrecy. You don't tell somebody that this happened, or you don't tell them that we did this, and then the one little white lie builds, and before you know it, it has become such a full-blown lie that you're not even sure what the truth is or what it was. So
she talks about that on page 34, where she's like, lies are told about the most insignificant aspects of daily life. Like if someone is like, how you doing? And you're like, fine. Or if someone's like, hey, do you want to go to the thing? And you're like, well, I actually got all this ish to do. And you're like, why don't you just say no? And I know that for me, it usually is because the person that's asking will then like follow up with, oh, well, you know, oh, you don't got nothing to do. Like even now, for example, okay, we're all stuck at home, but I might not want to talk on Zoom, but we'll be like, oh, I got to cook, girl. Or I got to do this, or I got to do that. And you don't really have to partake in that lie. And I love that she says that on page 34. Like it's so unnecessary, and it just turns into a mountain. And after some time, when you make so many white lies, you eventually end up forgetting. I'm sorry, I have a 2-year-old here. But
the family is welcome. The family is welcome.
Thank you. So yeah, and you just kind of forget like how many of those little white lies that you told, and it's just so much better to just tell the truth, even if it's unpopular. I loved this whole book, but I especially love that about this chapter. Sorry.
I feel like what we're talking about kind of goes back to where we started at the beginning with Paula's comment about that, like learning to disassemble is like learning how you deal with a patriarchal society, and how you have to like learn how to put on your face or take off your face when you come home, just to like deal with being a human. And that the key to, you know, coming into some truer understanding of love is learning how to like live life with as few masks as possible.
I think when we talk about white lies, the opening intro of chapter 3 kind of reminded me of how we lied to ourselves in the honeymoon phase of our relationships. The quote is from John Wellwood, and it says, when we reveal ourselves to our partner and find that this brings healing rather than harm, we make an important discovery that intimate relationships can provide a sanctuary from the world of facades, a sacred space where we can be ourselves as we truly are. And I don't think a lot of us show up as our true selves in the beginning of our relationships and our romantic relationships. And I think this stood out to me because I've been in like a lot of other relationships that didn't feel like a sanctuary, didn't feel like a safe space. So when I describe what I want my future relationship to look like, I always say like I want it to look like home. I want it to look peaceful. And in the beginning stages of a lot of the relationships I've had, I haven't had that because I'm not being my true self. And that stems from like the white lies, because you're afraid somebody's going to believe you if you show up as yourself, as your honest true self. So I just think that stood out to me a lot. And I wanted to share that.
I wanted to share about where she says, no love, we have to tell the truth to ourselves and to others. Creating a false self to mask fears and insecurities has become so common that many of us forget who we are and what we feel underneath the pretend. That sentence or 2 sentences made me think about social media and how like we have like a lying persona almost, and like a lot of people that I've dated have said, oh yeah, I checked out your social media. So even before like we meet in person, there's already a lie on like in some sense of the word, because like this, you know, and like bell hooks wrote this way before social media, but like that's like another mask and like another lie that we also like put on sometimes.
I wanted to bring just acknowledgement to page 22, where she says care and affirmation are the foundation of love. And I love that she mentioned that during the second chapter when it comes to children and kids, because I think oftentimes, I can speak for myself and speak from the I perspective, I don't feel like I was raised with so much positive affirmation and was sort of like, you know, your parents love you, you know, I'm here, like feeding you, clothing you, things like that. But how we lose sight of the power of words and how you speak them over to children, and how letting children know that they matter, letting them know they could take up space, letting them know that they are enough, and how transformative affirmation can be for children. And I love that she put that in the chapter around children, because I think we think about that for affirmations for ourselves or maybe as an adult. But I think as we are adults, if we have nieces or nephews or just, you know, around children, how the power of our tongue and our words can just empower them and also dismantle them and break them down in so many ways. That just lets us know that, like, you know, affirmation and words is just power, and it's the foundation of love. And I love that she spoke that about in the chapter 2, particularly for children.
I highlighted that too, where on page 30, she says, love is all love, and it is our responsibility to give children love. And I remembered that Toni Morrison did a chat with Oprah, and she talked about that what she thinks one of the most important things to do when you're like engaging with a child is to really look at the child, and how you receive them is so important, because that's the first thing that they see. Like if you're always bothered when you see a child, that's what they take. If you're like, oh my God, and you're so happy to see that child, that's what they receive, right? So it just reminded me of that conversation that I heard between Toni Morrison and Oprah. Yeah, I highlighted that in the book too. I think that was Simone that was talking.
Just to add to that, the only problem is when you start practicing that. I think some parents have to realize that in order to give that type of love to a child, you must give it to yourself first. And so if you're not treating yourself that way, it doesn't matter how much you can pretend or how many books you read or whatever, that child is gonna pick up that little fake act that you're doing. So I think it's beautiful that she made this book for us to read, but I guess putting those things in practice, I'm sure it'll be hard for those who have a hard time loving themselves, because number one, they probably haven't seen anybody who has loved themselves appropriately, so that they can somewhat emulate that, give it to themselves, and then give it to the child as well. So, yeah.
Page 25, on the upper top part of it, it says, being hurt by parenting adults rarely alters a child's desire to love and to be loved by them. Among grown-ups who were wounded in childhood, the desire to be loved by uncaring parents persists, even when there is a clear acceptance of the reality that this love will never be forthcoming. Yeah. And I think that that's a cycle that keeps happening, where the parent was not loving to the child, and the child still seeks the acceptance of that parent. And it just keeps on going no matter what age you are. And nowhere in there do you feel self-love for yourself, or the kid feels love for themselves from that adult. So I think that that is like a profound sentence for me when I think of a wounded adult, really was a wounded child.
No, I agree. And I was thinking about how you have, these kids who have to maneuver around parents who are narcissists. Because when you were reading that, I was looking at that too and thinking about how that kid has to figure out, what kind of mood is mommy in today? I know that she's not 100% there, but I'll do whatever it is that I have to do to gain her affection, even if that means feeding into her ego or his ego or whatever the case may be. And that when she was saying about the notion that kids have learned at an early age that if I do the right thing or whatever, I get what I want, but it discredits them of, having we don't think that kids have the emotional intelligence to understand what's going on. And they may not have the words to articulate and say, hey, this doesn't make sense to me, but they pick up on it, they know that it's altering somebody's mood or it's doing something. When I was growing up, I would study my mom, and I've now learned, or realized as an adult and going to therapy and stuff, that my mother is a narcissist. I love her to death, but she just is. And so throughout my childhood, I would learn like, okay, and I would tell my brothers, leave her alone right now. She's not in a good mood. My younger brother was the golden child. My other brother was the scapegoat, and I was the runner. So basically I was studying whatever was going on, but I could never get either of them to kind of see what was happening. Well, later on in my adult life, mom said something weird to me. She was, oh yeah, that's how she's growing up. You used to think you were so clever, and used to say, okay, like she would repeat some of the things that I would say as a kid, like, yes, ma'am, no, ma'am, because I had studied my mother. I knew what her moods were like. I knew when she was in a happy mood, in a good mood, in a bad mood, or whatever. And so even as an adult, to realize like you knew what, that I would do anything to stay in a peaceful pace with you, you know what I'm saying? That I would do anything to make sure that you weren't volatile, because when she was volatile, like everybody suffered, And so even knowing that as an adult, as an elder of the community or what have you, like that's what you remember. You remember that, like, oh, you were just always so pleasing, and you were always thought you were so clever and so sneaky. We just knew you were so sneaky. I'm just like, I was trying to survive. Like I was trying to get in where I could fit in to make sure that I got my needs met. So kids are super intelligent, but basically gaslighting kids. We are saying to you, you don't know what you're talking about. You don't know what you're doing. Just sit down, be still, be quiet, and we have this figured out. And then you become these adults who still perpetuate the same exact thing, not trusting their gut, not realizing a lie when it's being fed to you, and honestly not knowing what love looks like. And if there is any semblance of love, you're just kind of like, what the fuck is this? Like, what are you doing? This is uncomfortable. So yeah.
Thanks for sharing that. I wanted to bring it back to a comment that Paula said around, and Camila was touching upon it. I just want to give Paula a space for that.
I'll reiterate it.
Okay. Okay. Well, I wanted to bring it back to that because of the conversation that we've had so far around the lie, the different ways that we manipulate our own, like, lack of self-love. All of this, I think, what we need to remember is that Bell Hooks is a Black feminist theorist. And essentially, her theory is that patriarchy opposes deception, and how the patriarchy in particular both are internalized by men and women, and she poses it in different ways. She says that there is difference in terms of how men specifically internalize patriarchy and learn to lie and manipulate, thinking and preying on women gullible, and women tend to be lying and manipulative by internalizing patriarchy by being like meek or feeling like they need to be by men in this particular way. And so I think that we should talk about how patriarchy plays in specifically of what she's offering us, but then also one thing I did want to, I guess, have a caveat in terms of talking about gender when it comes to masculinity and femininity. She does introduce a word, a phrase, patriarchal femininity, on page 43. This is to say that patriarchy can be embodied by any gender. So this was written in early 2000s. So her around gender is very dated in terms of creating a binary between women and men and males and females. So I just named that. There can be internalized patriarchy and toxic masculinity regardless of the gender of someone. So I wanted to share that and bring it back to that. I'm referring to page 37, where she says patriarchy opposes deception. And then I guess on the other side of that, Hook says that the feminist movement helped women understand the personal power that is gained through positive self-assertiveness. So she's talking about the self-love piece that we were just mentioning in right now. So on page 37 and page 60, I feel like she's really trying to outline is at the root of this sort of like deception, and therefore like lack of love and ability to love.
Something that I appreciated that I hadn't really seen before when thinking about healing. Well, I guess I have seen it, but not explicitly addressed in the way that Bell Hooks does. This idea of moving past your childhood, right? Acknowledging that whatever happened was bad and it wasn't loving, but how do I then learn to love myself in ways that are practical and make sense? And I haven't finished it, but I'm in the middle of chapter 4 where she's laying out the different aspects of self-esteem, being self-acceptance and self-responsibility, and I forget what the last one I read was. But all of those things were really helpful and instructive for me in terms of thinking about ways that I might incorporate love into the ways that I think about myself. Yes, Marta, 6 dimensions. I haven't gotten through all of them.
I just remembered it because it's literally the last thing I left off at before I started the meeting. Sorry. So that's why I was like, yeah, 6 dimensions. I thought that was important. I'm like, I love that throughout the book, she is very consistent about reaffirming what the definition of love is, and to continue to tell us that love is care, respect, you know, commitment. And she says it over and over and over again. And for someone that needs like repetition, that like, she's almost like trying to like jam it into your brain. Like, this is what love, you know, this is my definition of what love is. So I appreciate that.
I was even thinking, what you were saying, Stephanie, males learn to lie, maintaining power, and females not only do the same, but they also lie to pretend powerlessness. And so, you know, in those relationships, like all, again, back to that kind of playing the role. You know, that's what you were saying, like patriarchy, it just perpetuates that, it keeps it going. I don't know if that makes sense. It was interesting that you said.
If I may, the whole notion that she uses the framework of those dimensions, it's not her framework, it's not her definition. It goes back to the book, Rose Track, that she takes Peck's definition and she expands on it using other people's work. So I want to be clear on that because her experiences, and she tried to relate it to the knowledge base that's already there. I found that she had, and she kept saying it, you know, especially when she, I in page 56, I felt particularly stressed or was falling into the abyss of negative thinking. She's so negative, the whole book. In the last paragraphs, she down to positivity, but I found that it was dragging me down. It really was
I'm hoping that as we move on the other dimensions, she kind of picks up, you know, more of a positive attitude to love. But my feeling was, boy, this is a woman that's really hurt. And she's accepted in many ways the victim role, and it bothered me very much. I don't know if anybody else picked that up, but that stuff, I had a lot of difficulty. And there were a lot of things also that I felt she said that was kind of a stretch, particularly when she said that Eve lied to God. Eve did lie to God. Satan likes Eve, and she told the truth to God. He told me to dabble. So there were things that when I really looked at the she was making, the whole, you know, the Clinton thing and all that, it was like, no, I think you stretched yourself a little bit too far over here. Convinced us of something that perhaps she wasn't so convinced about. So I'm telling you right now, I'm having challenges with this book. And I'm trying to see the more positive side of it, and it's really not happening. The other point, and I'll shut my mouth after this, is when she was talking about lies and the patriarchal or everything that we're dealing with. All I could think of is what is describing truth. Everything here had to do with the narcissism, the lying, the whole way that we know how he was raised. This is typical of, you know, he's typical of love. She's describing in many ways, but I've come to see our fearless leader as, you know, suffering from right now. So those are the three things I wanted to mention. Sorry if it has been already discussed. I thought it was important to bring up.
I see what you mean. I was reading her Wounds Passion before, and it took me a long time to read because it was a sad, like from her relationship with her relationship with her father impacted her relationship with her longest sister, who in turn did not love her. But as I read the book, it's really like her reading herself. Each time I read a chapter of Bell Hooks' books, any of her books, like, damn, talk about me. And she's not her she goes through. Sometimes she, like, some late or she feels sad all the time. She's really sad all the time. At least was for her from her childhood and story of her love. I think she was with her long-term partner for maybe like 15 something years. So that shapes like the way she saw love. That person of her father and something she didn't want to at all. So I understand you completely.
So I just want to let everyone know, a lot of people are, I don't know if it's my connection, but audio, I don't know if anyone else is experiencing that.
Yeah, my audio is cutting in and out too. Yeah, my audio is cutting off, but I came back. Yeah.
Just to be aware of it. I don't know what we can do about it, but.
I don't know what the stars are doing. I don't feel good. That's all I know are doing or the moon planet. We just talk about stuff. Yeah.
I have a question for Evelyn. Being that the video was being cut off, I was very interested in what she was saying. I know she mentioned in the book she ended up having with Clint, but I wanted to, if you can say that what you were saying about Clinton.
So she talks about how Clinton, let me see. On page 61, she says, President Clinton engaged in deceitful behavior. He created a kind of like for a public shame that no doubt mirrors of childhood shaming some already figured in his life made him feel he was worthless and he would never be worth as he did. Now, wait a minute. That's like she know about Clinton that she could make a statement like that. Maybe he's good friends with him. Maybe he knows his stuff. He read and said something. I didn't read it, but it was something like, you know, why would she put it in here without some kind of patient or I don't know. It struck me. Oh, this is strange. Weird. Did you read? You understand? Nobody felt that way. It was just.
Well, I want to personally there go back to what Elizabeth raised about the very connections to patriarchy, like the movement helping women understand personal power. When I read the Clinton section, what really struck me was how when we talk about that situation or other examples, we normally get that now through a lens of like male privilege and like what structurally certain people are allowed to do in society. And this book is very much focused on the self, right? So I think she's using him as an example of how, I mean, anyone else, anybody else who's done something that is incredibly destructive at the point of their lives, like, you got everything. Why destructing this way? And I think she's using an example of all of us struggle with these various, you know, how people were raised, founded as adulthood, in their adulthood, and then like sort of emotional reactions, or even the most powerful person in the world, like at one point in time, still behave in an incredibly self-helpful, manner. And so, what's interesting is that this isn't, at least thus far in the book, more about love like society. It's like we learn more about love to want to fix ourselves, and maybe from there use that to engage in the ways. But it's not like a call to arms necessarily. It's about fixing stuff. That's how I interpreted it.
I also thought it had to do with the fact that she wrote the book, or the book came out in 1998, and also, I mean, the president was still in office at the time when the book came out. So if we put it in the same light we would, let's say, for Obama, you know what I'm saying? We put a lot on, you know, as far as being the first Blackness, or, you know, in the neutral family and all of that stuff. But think about it in the 90s at that time when Clinton was around. Like, we thought that was the closest thing we were going to get to a Black president. You know, we thought, okay, we have someone we can identify with. He's country, he's, you know, he's intelligent, but that was, back then, that was our closest thing to a Black president. And we understood, you know, that he was an ally to the people. I mean, Maya Angelou was the same way when she talked to Clinton at that time. They loved him. I mean, you remember she did her poem about, you know, during the inauguration or whatever you call it. So we have to think about the time in which she is writing this book. As someone said before, you know, some terms are a little outdated. I would agree, like I wrote in the margin, so whenever he uses examples of her personal life or in her daily life, I don't really ever hear her talk about, you know, any of her interactions with her friends. They thought that she was crazy, or her lovers and how they treated her, or whatever the case may be. So I do think that she does, you know, and I don't know what's happened since, although I have watched a lot of her videos, and when I tell you she goes for the jugular, she just does. Like, it's very hard. It is very but I think that she does have a lot of retrospection, and she still has to, because I will say that just reading some of her other stuff, and just looking at her videos and stuff, new school and all that, she's not a woman, but she has also done the work too, and I'm sure she's taken a lot of abuse in the process. So I can understand why she might be that way, because isn't that what you know, as women, to be strong, to be, you know, not bashful in our thinking, and to be the great thinkers that we've been told we don't have the ability to be. So I can't be mad at her, but I know that she does not really mention her part in, you know, what things she might have when it comes to her, the thing that her friends are calling her crazy for saying, why don't you guys want love? You know, why want here? She does, I'm not saying the other things she's saying, because I think she had an example of, like, she said something to a group of people and they thought she was being assertive. What it was she said, but you know, I mean, if you say something that might offend other people, you need to be ready for the reaction that comes with it. So I think she needs to touch on herself a little bit more and be honest. Well, I agree with you though on that point.
Yeah, and I think to spine on that Clinton point, I mean, the context John gave actually was really important, because drawing Evelyn's comments as well, I also she kind of gave Clinton too much credit and saying his action was a masking or showing he wasn't the good guy. And I'm not really sure that actually was it's almost giving him too much credit. But you know, Sean makes a really good point that within the context, there was a different perception of Clinton at the time this came out. And now, also kind of going back to Evelyn's comments, I think it was just the way she wrote that section, in that she was making a lot of assumptions about Clinton and about his childhood. And, you know, like Evelyn said, how does she know? Like, what, what does she know about his childhood and how that led to the, you know? So I think that was the awkward part for me, is the wording that she used. And she may be entirely correct about it, but it seemed like she was just presuming a lot in that section.
Or maybe we're giving Clinton in this conversation too much credit, because to me, she kind of laid the foundation before that, where she was just merely using it as an example of powerful men who reach the height of personal achievement at age 60 in careers that often undermine all they have worked for by engaging in self-destructive behavior. And what better example than Bill Clinton? You know, I mean, how many of us get what we want, and whether knowingly or unknowingly, we self-sabotage? So I just wanted to throw that out.
I agree, and I think also in the chat that men use lies power and to gain power or to learn some level of power. So I think that's what the Clinton thing. I think I kind of maybe giving them. I think that could have just been, you know, anybody. This happens to be him at the time. She might know him because you know, he like, you know, he did grow up poor. He did grow. I mean, the things that we know about him. You know.
Yeah, I took a lot from that section personally. I think like the main point that she was trying to make was that, like, if you're not in a space where, for example, if you can amass so much, you can accomplish so much, but if your self-worth inside is telling you that you're not worthy to have this much, you can engage in self-destructive behaviors. And like the Clinton example is a good example, but I took that, like, looking at my own life, like when I've been in points in my life where I wasn't ready, or where I felt that I wasn't ready to receive something, I didn't put my all forth into whatever I was trying to accomplish. So yeah, it really hit home for me personally.
I like how she ended chapter 4, where she said, "It is sweet, isn't it, that I would dream of someone else offering to me acceptance and affirmation I was withholding for myself." And even like her using that word withholding, I think is so important. Because like we could not easily love ourselves. There's lots of work to be done. But like ask out of someone else when withholding that. Like I think her using withholding, like I almost think of like that commercial where he's like holding $1 over that man's head and he's like jumping for it, and we're withholding it from ourselves, and like we need to punish ourselves.
So to piggyback on that statement, can you guys hear me? So towards the end of chapter 4, like you just mentioned, Anisha, one of the best guides to how to be self-loving is to give ourselves the love we're often dreaming of receiving from others. So, you know, we're always taught, you know, like if you want a friend, be a friend. And if you, you know, you want people to receive you a certain way, this is what you have to be to others as well. She goes on into about, you know, how she feel about herself at over 40 and how she felt, you know, about being too fat, that. But, you know, it's just about taking the time to love that one thing about yourself, see the positive in yourself, and, you know, anything. And I can say for myself in my life where people say, hey, I thought you were one way, Jen, but then, you know, hey, you know, after I got to know you, you're a certain way. And I think as I gotten older, I just became more self-aware, but less self-conscious. And then I think that, me get and the reception that I've always wanted to get in my life that I never got as a child.
And I'll just add to that, going back to like the chapter about children and, you know, what understanding about your childhood and what wasn't there, but how do you as an adult parent your inner child when you think about what's missing, and what does that mean to like show your self-care and your self-affection and affirmation that you didn't get as a child, but you do that for yourself, which is and that also includes being honest with yourself. So like taking off the mask, like when we talk about you show up in your relationship, be a romantic or platonic, usually it's like your representative, right? Because you want yourself for free reasons, be vulnerable. You don't want people, you don't want to feel rejection. Just, you know, caution in ways, and are the ways that are kind of masking things for yourself too, you know, so kind of being honest with what your needs are and giving yourself opportunity to meet your own needs and being compassionate with yourself in that way as well.
I was actually, I think this is at the end of chapter 4. I was actually confused by the ending, by how she ends the chapter. She says, the light of love is always in us, no matter how cold the flame. It is always present, waiting for the spark to ignite, waiting for the heart to awaken and call us back to the first memory, being the life force inside of this place to be born, needing to see the light. I'm wondering if she meant that, because in other chapters she talks about how love is not necessarily intuitive, That is not something that, or innate. It's not something that we're necessarily born with, but we learn it. But here, this kind of contradicts, at least my interpretation of it is that it kind of contradicts what she said in these chapters. If the light of love is always in us, no matter how cold the flame is, she's saying that love is something that we're born with. It just needs to be lit up, or it's something that we kind of learn and cultivate as we become older. So I was just wondering, another kind of interpretation of the message here at the end of this chapter.
We all want love, and like we're like it's I want. I think it's like doing work to find that within yourself, and so like that you were when you're a child, even now you still want to be loved, and you just have that in you. And even like when we're children, we just love so much. And like, we didn't realize that it's still there in some sense, and so like it kind of ties back to previous chapters. Like we want to as children, and like it's a choice, and I think it's a choice to see that out in the work, and that is like the ignition. I read it.
Yeah.
Okay.
You were first. Go ahead.
Well, I was gonna say, I think I recall in the intro, and I can't find the page where she talks about something about children have this natural love, but I think the way she talks about that we learn it is that we actually learn it wrong. We learn how to practice love, and then learn it wrong, and we're kind of doing it the wrong way. So I think that is how to reconcile what she said earlier with that paragraph at the end of chapter 4, where it sounds like she's saying it's innate. I think she's saying the ability is innate, but we kind of then society sort of like we practice it.
Yeah, I think the ending of chapter 4 is like she's still framing it as a choice to choose to love, right? Because you can choose to like ignite that so-called flame, or you could choose not to. Like going back to what Alyssa was saying, I think the thing is like we learn children respond to notions of care, and not necessarily having to do with like actively being loving.
I think this is an interesting question. I have to say it, and I'm glad you raised the contradiction of it. When I read it, the first thing I saw was that like the title of the next chapter is Spirituality, Divine Love. And for me, it felt like it's a hint forward. That's where she's going into, so many spiritual traditions talk about you're made in the eyes of God, or you're a child of Christ, or everyone has like good nature in them. And so for me, it was like the jump off point to where she goes 71 with living life in touch with divine spirit lets us see the light of love in all living beings. Like there's just something innate in human nature is like kernel love, and that's just sort of we are as spiritual beings in the world. And I feel like the childhood development piece, how much often that light gets to grow into something bigger, or is it always going to be this tiny little flame that is on the verge of dying out?
And I'm glad that you brought that up, because what struck me about that chapter 6, I'm sorry, what I'm saying was that what struck me about chapter 6 is that it's only like 6 pages long. She doesn't, if this is the kernel of truth in this whole book, why do you devote so little to this to me very important aspect of the spiritual nature of love? and she gets it short thrift, she can talk 20 pages about being victimized, and then my position is on my view of love, it's 6 pages long. Okay, so I didn't go on to the next reading of the next chapter. I'm hoping that she will expand on that a bit more, but I was disappointed in that one. And I understand you writes about one, that chapter 5, like she says, this was the hardest chapter to write for her, and I can see how she struggled. You can tell how she's been struggling with these contradictions in her life. But then you have a chance in the issue of, in the topic, the theme of spirituality, to expand on that, and she drops the ball, in my opinion.
I agree. Like chapter 5, there was a disconnect for me. I was highlighting like crazy, like chapters 2, 3, and 4. And then I got to chapter 5 and I was muddling through it. And it, some of the examples, she was using, with regards to MLK and a couple of other examples. I'm like, okay, I think I see where she's trying to go with it. And really just explaining, which is really the highest form of love. And but it's a type of love that's really just, it's hard to really just articulate. And I could tell that he struggled in really bringing that to life and making us really connect to that.
I would definitely say I agree that she struggled with that, but I have to be honest with you, like when it comes to our definitions of love now, as we're reading this book versus what depending on what you've seen growing up, and then to involve religion on top of that, I hate to say it, but there's a lot of cognitive dissonance that goes on. I mean, when you talk about intellectually speaking about what love entails, and then going into the Bible and going into the Old Testament and listening about reading about the carnage that happened to people for disobeying, talk about some creepy stuff. It wasn't all that great in the New Testament either. So how, and she identifies as Christian, although I do believe she has encompassed some other religions or what have you. But if you just to Christianity, if we're talking about love is not abuse, love is not, bringing on wrath and all these other different things, I hate to say it, we might have to look at some other stuff then, as if you 100%, follow the Bible, because even the thing about the debate about spare the rod, it does say, what does it say? Spare the rod. If you spare the rod, you hate the child, or something to that effect. So it's like, it's confusing. And even for myself, I've struggled with that, and I've kind of gone different places, but it's hard to have to come to terms with the God of love, then to, speaking, how women are treated, what the Bible says about children, really, it does say, hearken the children to come unto me, but then what other part did they have? You know what I'm saying? If you weren't a man, basically you didn't really have many. So how does that, how do you really define love in the way that we are reading now versus what we've been taught biblically?
Yeah, Sean, I totally agree with you, Sean. I was raised as a church kid, and so like when I first came reading bell hooks, we a more comprehensive understanding, a very, very thorough understanding of what love is. And I think the problem is with organized religion, organized religion can be really tricky because fortunately a lot of spiritual leaders tend to manipulate and deceive the prisoners, and sort of get the definition of love as defined by organized religion tends to get sort of muddled because of those things, and oftentimes we can become confused, or we can tend to not even want to deal with love in terms of how religion defines it, just because of all of the corruption, just bad teachings from the church. So yeah, and I do think bell hooks personally does have sort of a disconnect from it.
I think in some way she tried to address like some of the contradictions within organized religion. I want to say on 7 when she talked about like, fundamentalists and how, you know, it leans more towards the status quo and how it's define imperialism, military sexism, racism, homophobia. So there she was trying to, at least I was trying to call it out and just kind of acknowledge that. And she mentioned, regardless of whether it's Christianity or your, whatever your faith is, that there is that kind of disconnect from how people interpret the scriptures in the Bible and or the Quran or the Torah, have you. I think personally for me, I don't think anybody can be a fundamentalist when it comes to religion. Like nobody follows any book to the T, and that most people tend to pick what works for them in a way, and that to try to look at that through like the love lens is to really focus on the part of whether it be Christianity or whether you're Muslim, Buddhist, the part of the community and interconnectedness and showing love in that way in terms of the spiritual part of it. So that's my 2 cents on that.